Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I want to start off by saying thank you to everybody who commented on my last fine art Painterly retouch video. I got a really good response. A lot of people were very positive and they said that they found it super useful going through the video on a very slow and steady step-by-step basis. So I'm going to make another one and hopefully you'll find this one just as useful as well. Now, this being a fine art retouch, or a fine art painterly photograph, what I actually mean by that is we're trying to simulate something that might be common with an oil painting, something that has an old vintage feel. It has a fine art painting and drawing type of look. But in order to do that, we also need to make sure that the original image also has that kind of theme. Therefore, you can see here the way the model is standing, the very delicate hand position, the eyes closed, the old dress, and then the environment. They're all going to work together in harmony with the retouch to create the final painterly look. So let's start off and get straight into it. So first of all, I can tell that I'm a little bit hot on the skin. I've shot at f1.8. We're at 640th of a second. Everything's natural light. We've got light coming in through here. And we're shooting at 35 millimeters on the Sigma 1.4 art. If you want to know about that lens, if you want to know about this entire shoot and what happened, I'll link some videos down below and they'll give you a bit of background. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with exposure. And at this moment in time, I don't want to add any contrast because I can do that all later on. In fact, I want to reduce contrast a little bit and I want to bring a little bit of light into the shadows, but at the same time I want to pull down the whites and I'm going to pull down the highlights a little bit as well, just so we have a little bit more of a neutral starting point. Now this was shot in camera raw, and we're at 8-bit right now. Now I could go to 16 bits, but to be honest, I'm not really going to see a visual difference. Maybe a little bit of banding issues I might be able to avoid if I grade it heavily, but I think I should be okay. So I'm coming into the forehead, and what I really want to do, and I'll just reset this so you can see, I want to make sure that in this area, which is not overexposed, it's not blown out, we've not reached any clipping, I want to make sure that I've got lots of detail in here, and I want to retain the shine, but I also want to keep all this texture. So that looks pretty good. And in terms of the color, yep, it does feel a little bit warm, so I'm just going to pull down the tint slider a little bit. Now I could use the white balance tool and try and pick something white in the scene, but to be honest, I didn't really use a gray card on the shoot, so I'm just going to eyeball everything. And if it looks good to me, then I'll be happy. Really what I'm wanting to do is avoid the skin being too orange, so I've just basically cooled it down. That looks good, and I'm just going to open the image into Photoshop. Now I am going to be using a couple of actions, and what I will do is I will actually link down below the actions that I'm going to use in today's video, so you can follow along and use these actions as well. They are very, very simple. Basically just a frequency separation. Now I've got the image like this. The first thing I tend to do is I work with composition. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to double click and unlock the layer. I'll click OK, and then I will make a copy just so we can come back to the original image and see where we've come. Hit the crop tool just over here, or C on the keyboard. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to extend the image a little bit. I just like the whole panoramic, almost anamorphic widescreen look. It just appears cinematic to me. Not very fine art, because you didn't really actually get compositions or framing like that in fine art. But for this I am going to do that. I'm going to go a little bit wider, and then in order to fill these areas, I'm going to try two things first of all. First, I'm just going to use the selection tool. I'm going to select this area, and then I'm going to go Edit Fill, and I'm going to hit content aware. I'm going to let Photoshop work out what should go there, and we'll see what we get. Now you can see that's not very good. It's a bit of a mess, and this sometimes does happen when you don't have enough information to work with. So I'm just going to do a Control Z and go back. What I will do instead is I'm going to use a technique which I like to use, which is very, very straightforward. So what I will do is I will select this entire area here, and then I will go Edit, Transform, Content Aware Scale. So sorry, that was Edit and Content Aware Scale. And then I'm just going to pull this section out. Okay, and you'll see what's happened there is it's stretched it out, but it doesn't give the impression that it's overly stretched. You can't really tell that it's actually been stretched. Obviously, because we can see it, then we might notice it, but if you hadn't seen it before, you wouldn't notice. I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to come over here, go Edit, Content Aware Scale, and I'm just going to pull this guy out here. Okay, and then I've got a little bit of an extension on the scene. Now there's a couple of things that are bugging me. Number one, this corner area here, because we've got a dark area and then we've got a light area, we've got a high element of contrast here. So your eye is going to keep on being diverted down here. Now I could just select this area and go Edit Fill, Content Aware, and see what Photoshop does. And it's done that, but it's a little bit messy in there. Or alternatively, what I am going to do, I'm going to bring the crop tool back in, and I'm just going to come in a little bit. So I'm just going to eliminate that whole section. And then I'm just going to slightly reframe, because where I want the model is around about here. I kind of want her in the center of the frame, or her head in particular. But then I do want her body kind of just leaning off towards this edge. So I will do that, and then I will just use the marquee tool. I'll select this area, and I'll do a content aware fill, and I'll just let Photoshop fill that for me, and that's cool. That doesn't bother me too much. That looks okay. Let's have a go back. Yep, that looks good. So I'll leave that as that. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to tidy up any other little areas that are distracting. Just down here, we've got this little element here that's a little bit annoying. So I'm going to use the stamp tool. I'm going to set my hardness to 0, want it nice and soft. I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm going to sample over here, and I'm just going to paint this in. And I'll just paint from here. And I'll just make sure that I can blend this out, and it looks okay. Okay, that will do for now. And any little areas that look a little bit repetitive, like we kind of have a pattern emerging there I'm not happy about, so I'm just going to clean that up by just sampling from somewhere else. And that works for me. Again, these are little things that no one's going to notice later on, and if we do want to clean them up, we can. So is there anything else that is particularly distracting right now? No, I think I'm happy with that. So if we just have a look at what we did there, we quite simply, I'll just zoom out, sorry about that, we just extended and cleaned up the edges a little bit more focus on the model. So I'll just rename this layer, extension clean 1. And what I will do now is I'll just make a copy of this layer, and I'm going to call this skin hair clean. And the way I'm going to do this is pretty straightforward. Now what I like to do when I'm retouching skin is there's different levels of retouch. For something like this, I don't need to be 100% perfect, and I'm just going to use the patch tool for this. I really do like the patch tool. I feel it works really well, and all I'm going to do is circle an area which I feel has a texture that I'm not happy with, and I'm going to drag it to an area which I like. Now you might not use the patch tool very often. Some people might use the healing brush tool. In fact, I think in my previous tutorial I used the healing brush more than anything, but in this one I'm going to try and work with the patch tool because it's another tool that I actually love using. And I'm just going to do a quick cleanup of these areas. I'm going to remove most of these, if not all of these moles, and please don't message me or comment about me removing the real beauty of the model and I'm not doing her any justice and blah blah blah. This is purely a aesthetic choice, and you know, it's not something really to do with image, or I'm not trying to communicate any message about beauty as such. It's purely just an aesthetic choice. So I'm just going to work in here and take these little guys out. And I find the patch tool it's really easy and you get a nice result. Notice I'm not creating very big patches. And what's useful about it is you can take out even larger areas with ease. Okay, I'll zoom out again. I'm going to look out for anything distracting. I see this little sparkly thing in the hair. I'm just going to get rid of that without trying to break the hairline too much. That's not very good. Let's just drag it over there. Okay. I'll zoom out again. And I do that a lot. I zoom in and I'll zoom out constantly. Let's look at her body. Is there anything that is distracting? This little dark mark there I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to remove this on the neck. I kind of want it to look like a porcelain doll, basically. I want her to look very clean, very pale in that sense. Okay, that looks quite good. Now the next thing I will do is I will actually use the healing spot healing brush tool to get rid of the hairs, but I'm going to set the blending mode of this to darken. So as I drag on this light area, it will remove it, and it's going to be working on the areas that are darker than the areas it's going to be finding the lighter area and it's going to be matching the darker area behind. So it's a very nice method of cleaning up hair and things that are quite different in contrast to the background. So if we have a dark hair, we can set the blending mode to lighten, and if we have a light hair, we can set the blending mode to darken, and we can just get rid of those things. So you'll see here, I just run the brush across, and the brush was a bit fat. Ideally you want to use a brush the same width as the hair for a nice clean finish, and I'll do the same just here on the ear. I just want to clean this area up. I don't want to give the impression that she's got big white hairs coming out of the ears. And you're going to see I'm quite clumsy at times in the way I retouch. I don't get too finicky about things because I always think about the end goal, where most of these images are going to just end up on the internet. They're not going to be printed. They're going to end up on Instagram, and nobody is going to notice, you know, the odd random stray hair popping out of the ear, because that will not be the area their eyes are focusing on. So let's clean up this line here as well. Areas of contrast are important to clean up because they do draw the eye. So you want the area with the most contrast, really the model's face. Everything else wants to be somewhat more subdued. Even this line here, you can see, I will tone that down a lot more later on. Okay, so in terms of skin cleanup, I'm pretty much happy with that. I'm not going to do any more to that. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so that's the skin and hair clean, so we can see before and after. I'll just zoom in a little bit. Before and after. Still retaining the realism. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to even out the skin tones and so forth in the face, and we're going to create a really nice complexion. Now I'm going to show you a super quick way, and it's not always the best way, but for something like this I think it will work really well. We're not going to be doing any pixel level dodging and burning. We're going to avoid that. I'm going to show you a quick way of editing skin. I'm going to be using the frequency separation 8-bit action because I'm working with an 8-bit file. This is what I will use. I'll just click that and it will make the action for us. It will put it in a group, and we've got the high frequency layer, which is what we would work on for dealing with details, texture. The low frequency layer is going to be dealing with tonal values, luminosity values, and essentially color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the low frequency layer, and I'm going to come over to the toolbar and I'm going to select the mixer brush tool. So the mixer brush tool, if I just show you in a very crude manner, is doing this. You're basically taking tones. Notice the texture is remaining exactly where it is, but I'm dragging in, or I'm moving around the tonal values. So if I just pull the eyes out here, you'll see I've pulled that color right out into the frame. So essentially I'm smudging and mixing colors together. Now that was absolutely crude and obviously too strong, so I'm going to be bringing my flow down to about 15%. And this is where a pressure sensitive Wacom tablet is a must. And what I'm going to do is, using very light sweeping strokes of my hand, I'm going to start to actually push these pixels around and try and find areas where the change from light to dark is very abrupt. And you'll see that just there on the forehead. There's these dark patches. I'll zoom in a bit. And I'm basically going to fill those with the color or the value that is adjacent to it. Now this, over time, you'll develop this technique, and it does take a little bit of time and practice, but the better you get at it, or the more you do it, the more efficient you will become at doing it. Okay. So I'm going to see here, I've got these darky patches down here, and I'm just going to push these pixels. And this won't be the only method I use, but it will be a starting point because it's quick and it allows you just to paint and move the pixels around in a fairly straightforward manner. And it also adds to a little bit of a smoothing effect of tones and values. So I've got a little transition here. I'm just going to bring that down. I'm going to soften this here. I've got a dark area here, so I'll just try and blend a bit of this lighter area down into that and then pull that up. And then we've got this area here, so I'm just going to drag this. I'm going to pull this up as well. I'm just going to zoom out to see what's going on. Oops, just hit the Windows key there. Zoom out a little bit. Got it going on, and I'll just turn that off and I'll turn that on. And you can see what's going there. We're actually shaping the face. I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush here now because I'm going to create a slightly bigger brush stroke. And when you go bigger on the stroke, obviously the effect will be more dramatic, but the blend will be softer because of the relative size of the brush. There's a softer feather. I'm also going to work in this area a little bit. I'm going to pull some of this lightness down in here. And I'll just work the neck a little bit as well. The arms seem pretty good to me. Really going to mess around too much there for now. Okay, let's come in here. Now we can see we have this quite dark area here in the eye. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to see if I can pull in. Okay, let's go back to the brush. I'm going to pull in some of this lighter area under the eye up and in. I'm just going to fill that area a little bit. I'm going to be careful not to dilute that area too much. Let's zoom out and see how that looks. We'll turn this all off, turn this back on, off, on, and you'll see what's going on here. I'll zoom in again and we'll turn it off. We're not removing the texture, we're just moving the values. Okay, let's go back to the brush. I'll carry this on a little bit more. And the nice thing is you can actually pull the highlights in and out as well. So I'll just extend that nose highlight, bring that one down a little bit. Quite like the highlight on the eye, so I'll pull it across and make that area pop a bit more. The lip highlight works quite nice. What else have we got? We've got some little dark patches down here. Just work this. And clean up the area. Now I've still got this line here on the forehead. You'll notice this line here. And if I use my mixer brush, I can't actually get rid of that because it's a texture. So I'll come over to the high frequency layer. I'll just use my patch tool, which is over here. I'll pick that little line. I'll drag it down and it's gone. And I'll just do a little bit more of a forehead cleanup. Now you might think, well, why didn't I do this at the beginning? Well, you don't always notice things at the beginning. And as you work through the picture, you start to see things that you missed earlier. That's absolutely normal. There's no expectation you have to get it all in one go. Remember, the way you actually go about editing, there is no right or wrong way. It's just your way, or whatever way you develop. And I know there's people out there that will moan and whine and they'll say, well, you shouldn't be blurring skin and you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the final image. And if the final image looks good, it does not matter at all, in my eyes, how you got there. It's totally irrelevant. Does not matter. What matters is the journey and the enjoyment of creating something beautiful and something that you like. And that should be your focus, and really your focus only. Let people moan about techniques and processes. You just focus on creating your art and doing something that brings satisfaction and joy to you. Okay, let's see what we've got. All right. So let's just turn this whole frequency separation group off and on. Let's pull out a little bit here. We'll turn that off and on. I'll come back in, and I do this at various levels until I spot things. Now I'm spotting this little white scar here, which is in an area of nice clean skin, so it's distracting for me. I'm just going to get rid and just clean these little areas up a little bit more. Looks good. Okay. Now you will also notice there are some little dark blemishes in these areas here. So I'm just going to get rid of those, and I'm going to do this using a very simple curves layer. I'm going to add a lighten curve like this. I'm going to pull up the midtone so it's nice and bright. And then I'm going to invert the mask, because this is an adjustment layer and it comes with a mask. And if we press Ctrl I, now the mask has turned to black, which means everything is hidden. I'm going to get a regular brush, not the mixer brush. I'm going to set my flow to 5%. And I'm going to set my size a lot smaller. And I'm going to zoom in. And I'm just going to start to paint these areas here. I'm going to make sure I'm set to white. And I'm going to start to add light in these areas. Now this is, technically it's a bit of dodging and burning, and I said I wasn't going to do that. But it is very useful for these little areas. Now if you want me to do a full tutorial on dodging and burning a portrait, although there are many tutorials already out there on that, I'm more than happy to show you that. But I'll be totally honest with you. In my portfolio of work, I never only use dodging and burning. I will use many different techniques. The one that I've just shown you with the mixer brush tool, frequency separation, I will, yes, dodge and burn where necessary. But I don't stick to one technique only. I like to work quick. For me, it's about getting the best result in the shortest space of time. Just going to lighten some of these areas here. Okay, so what I'm doing, what I'm looking for are any dark blemishes or any dark areas that are extremely eye-catching. Now you see these little hairs here and there. I'm not going to get rid of those. I'm actually going to keep those in. Because it's, when it comes to retouching something like this, it's not necessarily about what you remove, it's also about what you keep in the picture. Now right now I'm really quite happy with what I've got, so I'm going to just turn off the curves layer, and this was just my touch up on the dark areas here. You can see we've just cleaned those up. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a stamp visible layer. This means I'm going to take everything that I've got and I'm going to compress it into one layer, but I'm still going to make sure I've got all the other layers underneath. So we'll do that now. Control, Alt, Shift and E. And we've got our clean one done. Okay, so now we've got the stamp visible layer. We're just going to work from this new layer, which is a combination of all the layers underneath. And I'm just going to look carefully now at the exposure level on the model. I'm going to look at where the light is falling, and basically I'm going to slightly squint my eyes. I know this sounds very strange, but if you slightly squint your eyes so the image becomes blurred, you stop seeing detail, and what you start to see are areas of light and dark. And straight away my eye is being drawn to this area down here, which has a lot of strong highlights. So I want to tone this bottom area down a little bit. I'm going to do that by using a normal curves. And I'm going to bring down the highlights here. Look what's happening. Okay, I'll just bring them back up again. I'm going to bring down the highlights only. I'm not going to drag from the middle because that's going to mess around too much with contrast. I'm just going to bring down the highlights, which is going to flatten and soften the image in a way. You see what happens? It's flattened it. Now that's a really awesome thing, because what I'm looking at right now when I pull this down is I'm going to look at the exposure on her dress and on the background. This is a technique I use a lot in many different styles of portrait and fashion work. I'll bring down the highlight slider. This is going to darken the whole scene. The wall has become darker. This area is toned down a little bit. I'm going to bring this down until I get the level that I'm after, like so. And then what I'll do is, because we've already got a mask created, I'll use a big, soft, large brush. I'll set the flow to, in fact, I'll set the flow to 100, and I'll bring the opacity down to about 17 to 20%. And I'll increase the brush size, and I'll start to tap. Using a black brush, I'll start to tap. And I will very slowly start to paint light into the area that I want the attention to go. So that's obviously going to be the model's face. I'm going to bring a little bit of this painting into the hair. Essentially what we're doing here is we're dodging and burning, we're playing with light, we're sculpting the model, we're drawing the attention of the viewer to where we want. And in this case, I want it to be her face. And I want to keep the dress toned down, so I will leave that as it is. And I'll just show you the before and after. It's quite dramatic. We've gone from this to this. Now the quality of light almost seems to have changed as well. The light quality that's coming through the window now seems to be very soft, subdued, like an overcast day, just by toning down those highlights. I want to bring a bit more light on her forehead, so I'm going to paint a bit more with the black brush. And I'm going to keep turning this on and off. I'm going to bring a bit more into the hair. I'm going to bring the opacity up to about 51% now. I'm going to close this and make the brush smaller. Let me zoom in for you guys here. Notice I'm working at quite a zoomed out level. I tend to do that a lot. I tend to zoom out when I'm working so I can see the overall picture. Now I'm going to paint into these curls. I love adding little highlights to the hair. Really gives it more shape and dimension. A little bit on the eyes, a bit on the nose, a little bit on the lip, a bit on the chin. Looks quite nice. Let's see where else we can work this. Yeah, I'm liking that. It's looking good. Now what I will do is I'll get a white brush, which essentially is going to darken areas, and I'm going to add a little bit of this darkness just around the eye. I'm going to bring the eyeshadow down a bit, it's a little bit darker, and a little bit on the lip, just to give it a little bit more contrast there. Okay, I quite like that. Let me zoom out again, see what we have before and after. And I'm also just going to work the forehead again a little bit. That's a bit too much, just to darken that off area. Okay, that's good. So I'm quite happy with that. We've toned the dress down a little bit. Everything seems to be working a bit better. I am a little bit nitpicky. I'm just going to do another curves. I'm going to bring the highlights down again. But really, I only want to focus on, I'll do an inverted mask. I really only want to focus on the bottom of the dress here. I just want to tone this down a little bit more. Like so. Now we've got no strong highlights on the dress that are distracting us. And I'll put both of these layers into a group, and I'm just going to rename this group Light. Okay, and you'll see before, after. All right. And it's done something else as well. If you see in the corner here, it's a little bit funky going on. I'm looking back at this when I did the extended canvas, and it's a bit apparent here. It's darkened off there. You don't notice it as much, and we will maybe crop in or darken this area a little bit later as well. Now, I did mention we have this area over here, which is a little bit annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to see how it would look if I was to remove it all together. And I'll use the marquee tool, and I'll select this area, and I'll do a shift and backspace, which is a shortcut for fill. I'll do a content aware, and I'll just get rid, and we'll see how that looks. Okay, now what it's done is it's actually brought in something else. It's brought in a little bit of colour. It's obviously looked at part of the scene, and it's brought in this bronzy colour, which for me is a bit too strong. So let's see how it looks. Okay, how about we use our hue saturation, and we quite simply pull the saturation down in this area, which will remove a little bit of that colour. That looks quite good. And then I'll go over it one more time. Let's just see what happens. And let's darken it a little bit more. Okay, that not too bad. Now, obviously, it's going to be a totally subjective thing whether we like that there or whether we don't. You know, we could even just reduce the opacity so it's there slightly in the background, creates another layer or dimension. I think I prefer that rather than having it gone all together. We end up with this big void of nothing. We'll use about 87%, and we've got this little line here. Looks like another curtain off in the background. That works. We can stick with that. Now, let's see, is there anything else? Okay, now at this stage, again, I'm happy with this, and I will do a Control Alt Shift E, and I'll call this Liquify Ready. Now this is another stage in the process which I'm happy with. These are kind of what you could call stepping stone points or milestones, whatever you want to call them, where we've done a fair amount of work and we're quite happy with the process. Okay, and these are also good points to actually save a JPEG file or a JPEG version. Okay, so I would save a JPEG version when I hit the clean element here. When I arrived here, I'm going to turn these guys off, and then I would save another one when I hit the Liquify Ready. Now I've called it Liquify Ready because it's pretty self-explanatory. This is where we're going to actually do some liquefying work, and I always suggest before you do any liquefying, you save your file, because from experience, this is the point where your computer could crash. Not that it always does, and it's very rare, but when it has crashed in the past, it's normally when I started liquefying. So let's do this. Filter, liquefy. And when I use the liquefy tool, I avoid using the stylus on the Wacom tablet. I just find it's far easier to control the liquefy tool by using the mouse. And what I plan on doing here is not making her thinner, not making her taller. She don't need any of that. I just want to make some areas appear a little bit more, what's the word, dynamic maybe, or a little bit more extravagant. What I will do is I'm just going to pull that little lump there in the arm down, and that's all I'm going to work on her actual arms or shoulders or anything. And I've got the forward warp tool, and the size is 500, the density is 34, and the pressure is around 30. This little divot here where the dress puffs out and then it just drops, I don't like that. So I'm actually going to pull this dress out. So first I click in the dress, then I come to the outside and I click on the dress, and then I come down and I pull, and I do that in those stages so as to not warp the picture too much and it starts to look a little bit odd. I'm going to tuck this in a little bit. I want this nice curve. I don't want it to look like she's got a little pot belly. I don't want it to look like she's leaning back and sticking out her stomach. I want the impression to be that the dress is falling like that. And I'm going to pull this out from here and pull this down a little bit. Okay. Equally, I'm going to just pull this out a little bit here, and it's just making the dress appear a little bit bigger. And I'll also pull these guys up a little bit, again just exaggerating this wonderful work on the dress, a beautiful work of art in its own right. And equally with the hair, I'm going to lift and pull, lift and pull. I'm going to avoid distorting the boat. I'm going to make the hair stick out a little bit more. Give the hair a bit more volume, make it look bigger than it actually is. And at any point I can press the P key, which is preview, and we can see it's such a subtle change, but it's just lifted everything. On and off, on and off. Now you've got to be very subtle with this because you can ruin the picture. So I'm just going to leave it at that before I overdo it. I'll click OK, and that's our ready liquefy image. Now one more thing I will do is I'll get the crop tool. I'm just going to play with my cropping a little bit more. I'm just going to come in here. That works, and I'm just going to come in here. Okay, kind of happy with that. Yeah, I like that. So now we are ready for color grading, and if you watched my previous tutorial, you know I used a plugin called Alien Skin. And if you're into this kind of work, if you're into fine art, portrait, painterly effect, stop what you're doing and just go buy this plugin, because you cannot simulate the effects you can apply with this plugin just in Photoshop. Some people will say, oh, well, you can do it in Photoshop using curves and color balance. Go ahead, try it. Show me. Show me if you can get as close as you can using Photoshop as you can using Alien Skin. I just don't buy it. You just can't. Alien Skin is fantastic. So I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to call this G1. I'm going to make another copy. I'm going to call it G2. I'm going to make a third copy, and I'm going to call it G3. The G stands for grades. So essentially I'm going to grade this image in 3 different ways, and then I'm going to pick and review and see what I like. So I'll start off with G1. Let's go filter, Alien Skin, and we're going to hit exposure X2. Now the more and more you use Alien Skin, you will develop your own presets and so forth. And you know, look at that straight away. This was just sat on black and white Polaroid. It's just such a beautiful program. So what I want to be using is I'm going to come over to Color Films Polaroid. Okay, and I'm going to see what I like. I don't know what I like. I'm going to see what tickles my fancy. I'm going to see which one I like the look of. Let's have a look. And you can just hover your mouse over and it will change. And you know, you can just go through these, spend quite a lot of time. Yellowed, creamy blown highlights. Oh, so much fun. Polychrome yellow. Yeah, there's just so many to choose from. We've got Color Films Aged. All these lovely presets as well. Obviously some are extremely stylized, but that looks pretty crazy. I don't think I'm going to use that. Color Films Print, simulating some of the older film types that we had. Color Films Vintage. And what's nice about this program is everything you look at and use is fully customizable. So you can tweak it and change it and do what you want basically. And what's also nice, if you kind of leave your mouse hovering over the preset, it gives you a little description. An early color process introduced in 1907. The image is created by combining layers of dyed potato starch grains on a glass plate. That means nice, isn't it? It's lovely to have that information. Okay, Kodachrome, sorry, 35mm slide frame. Oh, that is beautiful. Let's come over to here, Kodak. Wonderful. Kodak 35mm skin tone warm. Warmer for the skin tones. Let's come up to the cyan and orange. That's beautiful. Kodachrome 35mm faded cyan stroke orange. This is wonderful. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to make some tweaks because it's not exactly how I want it. First of all, the grain is far too excessive. It's at 100%. I'm going to turn it right off. And I'm going to bring it up slowly. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to bring this up to there. What's that? 53. Okay, I'm going to round this down. 50. Oh, what have I done? I pressed enter. Oh, I'm just getting so excited with all these presets. So I'm just going to go back. Let's go back. Filter. Alien Skin. Exposure. Don't press enter. Don't press enter. Let's come back here. Grain. 50%. Okay, we've got the grain right. Let's just close this guy for now. Let's go into full screen here. Now, it's a little bit too saturated for my liking. So let's come over to the saturation here. Let's pull that down a little bit. Let's bring this down. That's too much. Let's bring this back up again. -8, okay. We've got the warmth, cool and warm going here. Let's cool this a little bit, just so it's not as warm. There is a slight delay as it processes. I'm just going to slow that down a little bit. And I love these oranges in the hand and so forth. I mean, you know, maybe they don't look very natural. Maybe the skin looks a little bit strange here. The shadows have gone orange. We can fix this. It's not a problem. We can fix it in the next step when we bring it back into Photoshop. But you know, you might like it. We might like that. Okay, let's have a look at these shadows and midtones. Reds. Let's come that into the minus. If we pull the reds into the minus, we start to remove some of that orange. But then we're removing it globally. We're removing it all over the hair and everywhere. Now that kind of works quite well. Maybe bring it up a little bit. I don't want it to look like a corpse. So let's bring a little bit of color back in. Yeah, it looks quite nice. Okay. All right, I'm gonna apply that. And that's going to be my first grade. Okay, we will go on to grade 2, and we're going to do another one. Filter, alien skin, exposure X2. Let's bring up our tab here. Let's see what else we can find. So this was Color Films Vintage. Let's close that whole panel down. Let's go back to the color Polaroid. Yellowed. Creamy blown highlights. We don't want anything blowing out. Not feeling that. This is quite nice. SX70 blend, a small production film introduced in 2006 by Polaroid. It's got some nice magentas in there. I actually quite like that. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to bring the grain right down again. It's just far too excessive. What else have we got? Let's have a look at the greens. Is there anything I don't like about that, really? That's quite nice. I mean, maybe we bring down the highlights a little bit. Seem to have gone a little bit too strong for me. Let's just tone down those highlights, soften it a little bit. It's beautiful, nice magentas and like purples going on in there. I really like it. I'm gonna apply that as well. That's a nice color. That was the one. That was G1. So I've not used alien skin in a while, but you see what's actually happened here. Although I created G1, it hasn't actually applied the effect to that layer. It's created this new layer with the effect on it. So we can actually just get rid of G1 and rid of G2 and rid of G3. And what's nice is it's also renamed the layer according to the effect that we've used. That must have come in the update. As far as I remember, that wasn't happening before. So that's the first one we've done. That was the second one that we've done. Now we could carry on and go on and on, but I'm actually just going to make a decision. I really like this. However, I do feel the effect is a little bit strong. The beauty of this is it's on its own layer. I'm going to take this right down. I'm going to pull this up until I find a level of this effect that I like. 70%. That number. 70% is literally the magic number in Photoshop. It always just works 70%. That for me is perfect. 100% too strong. 70% for my taste. Beautiful. Okay. So there we have it. Now the final part of this will be a sharpen mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first make a stamp visible layer. I'm going to rename this sharpen. And I know there'll be some people that will be saying, why don't you just create smart object and add smart filters and stuff like that? I'll be honest, I just don't use smart objects. I don't use smart filters. This is the way I work. I make copies of layers, I duplicate, and I work from there. All these layers that I've made here is purely for the actual presentation for this tutorial. Generally, I don't even have these layers. I just have original, and I'd now be at sharpen, and I just keep merging down, because once I'm happy with something, I'm pretty much happy with it. But for this tutorial, I've obviously created these layers for you. Now, sharpen, I'm going to use a filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. I'm going to pop in here to the eye, because that's what I want to look at here. And 81 looks good, 2.6. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. I want a nice sharpen effect. I'm going to over sharpen to start with. And then I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to see the before and the after. And in fact, I'm going to press Command J. I'm going to double up on that and merge them together. I'll add a little bit more sharpening there. Okay, so we've got a double sharpen effect there, and that's just worked nice. It's just brought out the little details on the eye. Okay, there we have our complete fine art retouch. Let's see where we've come from. Are we ready? Let's just zoom in here. I'm going to close this guy, move this over here. Let's start with our original. And let's go to the end. Wow. Before, after, before, after. Look at how the eyes are drawn straight to the face. Here, we're all over the place. We've got light here, we've got spots of brightness here, we've got a big white spot here, we've got the hair, you know, it's just, there's no focus. Here, that's it. Eyes, boom, straight to the face, and then we just enjoy this, and then we start to look at the back, which is very flat, low contrast, and subdued. That's it. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. Look out for the frequency separation action in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, if you found it useful, if it was helpful for you in any way, shape or form, then I would greatly appreciate, not only do you like and comment, but more importantly, I want you to share this video. I want other people to see it, and I want to get more people coming and looking at the work, looking at the channel and helping people out. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you hopefully in the next one.